A panda walks into a restaurant, sits down, and orders a sandwich. After he finishes eating the sandwich, the panda pulls out a gun, shoots the waiter, and then stands up to go. "Hey!" shouts the manager. "Where are you going? You just shot my waiter, and you didn't pay for your sandwich." The panda produces a badly punctuated wildlife manual and tosses it over his shoulder. "I'm a panda," he says at the door. "Look it up." The manager turns to the relevant entry and, sure enough, finds an explanation. Panda. Large, black and white bear-like animal, native to China. Eats, shoots, and leaves. Today we'll be talking a little bit about commas, and that's about as funny as commas can be. But I want you to take a look at this for a second. Eats, comma, shoots, and leaves completely changed the meaning of the sentence, didn't it? Without that comma, it simply says the panda eats shoots and he eats leaves. But when we put this in here, we've turned it into a list. And this is why commas are important. We're going to look at some of the uses for commas today, hopefully get a little practice in, look at some examples, and go from there. So first of all, a comma is this lovely little piece of punctuation that helps keep distinct ideas separate. They're especially important in series, we call them lists, after introductory words and phrases and around interrupting words and phrases, and also in compound and complex sentences, as you already know because we've already studied that, right? Yes, I hope you're right. All right, so let's first look at commas in a series. Use a comma to separate items in a series of 3 or more items. If you only have 2, you don't need a comma. If you have 3 or more, that's when the comma will come into play. And remember that you will still put a comma before the final and or. So look at this example, a series of nouns. The conference will be in Dallas, Houston, Galveston, or Austin. You see we have a comma separating every single one of those. Sorry guys, I got click happy. Series of verbs. During the conference, guests will eat, drink, and network. Now this first part is an introductory phrase, which we will talk about in a minute. And then this is our list here. Eat, comma, drink, comma, and network. A lot of people think that we don't need a comma here, but you do. Also a series of phrases like we studied when we did parallel structure. She dressed well, kept her head up, and maintained eye contact. Keep in mind that in a series of 3 or more items, you don't need to place a comma after the last item in the series. So if you continue the sentence after this, you don't need to put a comma here and then write it. Just keep writing. See the hint on page 371 for some great examples. If you have questions about this, ask me. Let's look at commas after introductory words and phrases. You place a comma after an introductory word. The word could be an interjection like yes or no, an adverb like usually, or a transitional word like therefore or however. Look at these examples. Yes, I am excited to take the final exam. Or yes, there is a Santa Claus. Introductory phrases of 2 or more words should also be set off with a comma. So the phrase could be a transitional expression like of course, or a prepositional phrase like in the morning. Look at this example. In the middle of class, he got up and began singing. So this is an introductory phrase, and it is also a prepositional phrase, and then we'll put a comma before we begin the main part of the sentence. We need commas around interrupting words and phrases as well. So interrupting words or phrases appear in the middle of sentences. These interrupters are often kind of things we want to say off to the side. Maybe we would put our hand over to the side and we would whisper them to our neighbor if we were in a conversation. They break the sentence's flow, but they don't really affect the meaning. And remember, we've talked about this all semester. If it's enclosed in commas, we should be able to take it out and the sentence will function without it. So look, this sentence, for example, contains an interrupting phrase. This is enclosed in commas. This is an aside, basically, right? It's an interrupting phrase. I'm just saying, for example, but it doesn't affect the meaning of the sentence. This sentence contains an interrupting phrase, can function just fine without that little thing in the middle. Another example of something similar is an appositive. And a positive comes right before or right after a noun or pronoun, and it gives further information about that noun or pronoun. And a positive can be in the beginning of a sentence, the middle, or the end of the sentence. And you always set off the positives with commas. So here's an example. Molly, comma, my high maintenance dog, comma, drives me crazy. This is a true statement. I have a crazy dog. But look, the point of my sentence is Molly drives me crazy. This, my high maintenance dog, is just additional information about Molly. This is an example of an appositive in the middle. To see examples of an appositive at the beginning and at the end, look at that hint box on page 373. Before we move on, I want to show you a little example really quick. Look at this sentence. If I wrote, my husband with brown eyes is very funny, I could get in a lot of trouble. Why? Why do you think? We're going to come back to this. I want you to consider this for a minute, and we will come back to it in a second. All right. So let's look at commas in compound sentences. You should already be an expert on these. A compound sentence, remember, has two or more complete sentences, so independent clauses that are joined by a coordinating conjunction, one of these fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. The formula, if you were going to write it out as a formula in math class, would look like this. Your first independent clause or complete sentence plus a comma, one of your fanboys, plus the other complete sentence or independent clause, which is the same thing. Take a look at the hint on page 375. All right, now remember in complex sentences, we have one or more dependent clauses along with our independent clause. So a subordinating conjunction is used. So when a subordinating conjunction is added to a clause, it makes the clause dependent. That's how you can recognize one, and that's how you can turn a clause dependent as well. Always, if a dependent clause starts your sentence, you will use a comma before you write your independent clause. Look at these two examples. The first one, because she desperately wants to succeed in life, she studies thoroughly. Now, because is an example of a subordinator. So this is our dependent clause, right? We cannot, we cannot write because she desperately wants to succeed in life, period. That is not a complete sentence. We need this other portion. This first part depends on the second part. Look at this example. She studies thoroughly because she desperately wants to succeed in life. Same words, different order. We do not need a comma when we begin with the independent clause. So this is with the dependent first, need a comma in between. When we start with the independent, we do not need a comma in between. Write that down on your note card. Remember it. It is so important, not only for the final exam, but for the rest of your life. It is a beautiful thing to know. If you know it, you've just made your life a whole lot easier. All right. Let's take a look at the example I just typed a minute ago. Let's think about non-restrictive clauses. A non-restrictive clause gives non-essential, which means unimportant or not completely necessary to the sentence information. In these sentences, that clause can tell us a little bit more about the noun, but it is not restrictive and it doesn't define the noun. So you place commas around it because remember our rule, if it's surrounded in commas, we should be able to take it out and it will not affect the overall meaning of the sentence. So here's an example. The restaurant, which is on Westheimer, has excellent seafood. If I said the restaurant on Westheimer has excellent seafood, then it is important to know that I'm only talking about the one restaurant on Westheimer. In this case, I'm telling you that the restaurant has excellent seafood. The restaurant is what has the seafood. And if you find another one besides the one on Westheimer, it's probably going to have good seafood too. But if I take this out of commas and I say the restaurant on Westheimer has excellent seafood with no commas, I'm telling you the one on Westheimer is the only one that has excellent seafood. Look at the hint on the top of page 375. There are some wonderful tips for using which, that, and who. They're very important. I'm holding you accountable for those, so take a look. So let's consider my example again. I said, my husband with brown eyes is very funny. If I do not put commas, I'm implying that I have more than one husband and that information telling you with brown eyes is important. So important that I can't leave it out. Now, if I if I know that's wrong, which I do, then I'm going to tell you that's just additional information. I'm telling you my husband is very funny. Does that make sense? So stay out of trouble. Don't imply that you have more than one spouse when you don't. And be careful, because that can really get you. All right, let's look at commas in business letters. When you write or type any type of formal correspondence, make sure that you use commas correctly in all parts of the letter. Let's pay attention to an address. If we write an address, we write 1234. This is a made-up street, by the way. Made Street, Houston, Texas. Ooh, what did I just type? Sorry, guys. Houston, Texas, 77777. This is our address. If you notice, I just put the house number, the street name, the city, comma, state, both capitalized. Remember, we just talked about capitalization rules. And then the zip code. No comma between these, no comma here. The only comma you'll find is between the city and state. Now, if I'm writing a letter or if I'm writing a sentence and I say, will all the people from Houston, Texas, please, thank you, computer for correcting me, please stand. If I put this in the middle of a sentence, Houston, comma, Texas, before I continue my sentence, I need a comma here. Every time I put city, comma, state in the middle of a sentence, I need a comma after the state before I continue on. The same is true with a date. If I'm writing a date just by itself in a letter, for example, if I write May 1st, 2003, and I go on, that's all I need to do. If I write, my husband and I were married on May 1st, 2003 in San Diego, I need a comma after the 2003. Hopefully that makes sense. So always after a state, in the middle of a sentence, you need a comma. Always after the year, in the middle of a sentence, you need a comma. But when you're writing a business letter, you do not. The same is true for the date and the city and state. All right, so in address, in the date, salutation is when we write, Dear Dr. Rogers. We will put a comma after the name, and then we will continue on with our letter. Now, in the past, many people have written to whom it may concern. This is no longer considered acceptable, so don't do it. Be careful. Make sure that you look up who that should be addressed to. And the same with complimentary closing. You'll write sincerely and sign your name. All right. Also, we just talked about these when we introduced direct speech. We will put a comma. Mrs. McClure said, comma, doesn't everyone love the comma? All right. Commas, when they set off interjections like man or oh dear or hey, we'll need a comma before we begin the normal part of the sentence. This is one of my favorite things. It comes from a book called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves, where she refers to that joke that I told you at the beginning of the lesson. The big final rule for the comma is one you won't find in any books by grammarians. It's quite easy to remember, however. The rule is don't use commas like a stupid person. I mean it. More than any other mark, the comma requires the writer to use intelligent discretion and to be simply alert to potential ambiguity. Look at these examples. Lenora walked on her head a little higher than usual. But if we said Lenora walked on, comma, her head a little higher than usual. Little better. The driver managed to escape from the vehicle before it sank and swam to the riverbank. I don't think the car swam to the riverbank. We need a little change. This next page, the convict said the judge is mad. Who said what? What if we said the convict, comma, said the judge is mad? Look at the big difference. Alright, so what do we do now? We go forth armed with our new knowledge. Y'all are going to do great.